Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really profound question that sits at the heart of so much theology. It's about how divine will actually interacts with our effort. Where does the miracle stop and where does our own responsibility start?
It's a fundamental question, and for today's deep dive, the source material gives us a framework for it, a way of reading certain Quranic verses that might, on the surface, look like direct physical intervention.
Right.
But when you apply this consistent, rational method, what's revealed is this much more integrated system. We're calling it divine guidance actualized through human agency.
And that gets us straight to the core tension, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're looking at verses about God teaching a scribe, or that really famous, almost jarring paradox from the battlefield.
The arrows.
The arrows. When the Quran says, you did not throw the arrows, God did. What are we actually meant to take from that? Is it a literal physical miracle that just overrides human action completely?
Or is there some kind of hidden logic at play? And that's our mission today. Because if you take these verses literally, it suggests an arbitrary universe where the laws of nature can be suspended at any moment. But if we follow the methodology a lot of scholars use, we find this structure. A structure where faith isn't about waiting for a miracle.
Yeah.
It's about what? Fulfilling a law.
Perfectly fulfilling a fixed, systemic divine law. The concept known as Sunnat Allah. And honestly, understanding this can completely transform faith from, a passive state into a really active ethical commitment.
Okay, let's unpack that framework first, because I can feel the tension immediately. We know some scholars read these verses as, well, just that direct divine acts, real physical miracles.
They do, and the concern with that view is kind of twofold. First, if God is constantly overriding natural law, it almost makes his omnipotence seem inconsistent. The universe becomes chaotic, not systematic.
And second,
it can lead to a kind of intellectual passivity. I mean, why study science or why struggle for justice if the final outcome is always just dependent on some unpredictable random intervention? Which brings us to the alternative, this idea of divine guidance actualized through human agency, or DGHHA.
Right. And this view argues that these texts are using figurative language. Metaphors, essentially.
Metaphors to show that our ability to act, our moral compass, it's all rooted in God's guidance, but we have to be the ones to sort of flip the switch.
Exactly. And the foundation for all of this is Sunnat Allah, the unchanging law of God. Think of it as the operating system of the universe.
Not just for physics, like gravity.
No, not at all. It's a consistent principle that governs the physical world, yes, but also the moral and social worlds. So the rational approach says divine actions operate through this law, not by breaking it. God sets the rules of the game, and those rules don't change.
Now, for you listening, this is why it matters. It encourages a proactive faith. If success depends on sticking to fixed laws, scientific or ethical, then our efforts, our decisions, they aren't random.
They become the very reflection of the divine will. That is, when they're aligned with the system.
It shifts the focus from just hoping for a miracle to actively studying and applying the blueprints, moral and physical, that are already there.
Precisely. And we see this so clearly when we look at the first example, the practical, ethical blueprint for the scribe.
This comes from Surah Al-Baqarah. It's a verse with incredibly detailed instructions for loan agreements, and it ends with this phrase: the scribe must write as God has taught him.
Now, if you take the literal interventionist view, you run into a problem.
A rational challenge, yeah.
Does this mean God physically taught every scribe in history how to hold a pen? Or that he dictates the clauses for every single loan agreement on Earth, transaction by transaction?
It seems unlikely. It would contradict that whole systemic nature of Sunnat Allah you just mentioned.
It would. So the teaching, the ilm being referenced here, it's ethical, not technical. God didn't teach the mechanics of calligraphy.
He taught the principles.
Exactly. The universal principles of integrity, justice, impartiality, honesty, that's the real teaching. The scribe's duty isn't just to write things down. It's to make sure the contract itself is just, that it follows the divine ethical law against exploitation and fraud.
I see. So the guidance is a moral constraint. It's not about the ink on the page, but about the standard of conduct that keeps the whole financial system stable and just. The consistency is the system.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, to think people might have debated whether God dictated pen strokes when the real teaching was about integrity? That's a much harder skill to master.
And that focus on internal ethical strength, that's the perfect lead-in to our next scenario. The battlefield.
The paradox of Surah Al-Anfal.
The famous one. The verses right before it are all about human responsibility. Never turn your backs, you have to fight. But then after the victory, the credit gets shifted. You did not throw the arrows, God did.
It's a flat contradiction if you read it literally. How can the text command you to do something and then deny you did it in the same breath?
So how does the non-literal view resolve that?
It synthesizes the two ideas. The technical action, the physical throwing of the arrows, that is undeniably human, but the ultimate control, the conditions for success. That's divine.
So God threw the arrows. How? Not by steering them in midair, I'm guessing.
No, but by providing the necessary systemic conditions for them to succeed.
And what are those conditions? It has to be more than just physics, right?
Oh, far more. Of course, it means ensuring the laws of trajectory work as expected, but the crucial part is about instilling courage and discipline, the psychological laws, in the believers. And at the same time, breaking the enemy's morale, those are the socio-political laws of consequence.
So God didn't suspend the law. He made sure all the different laws, physical, psychological, were perfectly aligned with the believer's effort.
And suddenly victory isn't a suspension of law, it's the law's perfect fulfillment. The human effort is the cause, and success is the divinely assured effect when that effort lines up with the system.
The source material even uses a specific term for this battle, right?
Bala
and Hasana.
Yes, a tribulation ending graciously, a blessing that comes through a test. The battle was designed to refine their character and prove that if you stick to the principles, you will succeed. That's the law.
So attributing the victory to God through it, it serves two functions. One, humility. It stops the soldiers from getting arrogant.
And two, it affirms where the ultimate source of that success comes from. The systemic coherence, the moral resolve. It all comes from the Creator. It's an acknowledgement of the whole integrated system.
This idea of acting through psychological laws, that takes us directly to the allegory of angels. I mean, we've all heard about the thousands of angels descending to help at battles like Badr.
Right, where you have just over 300 Muslims facing 1,000 opponents.
The literal reading there is difficult. If you have 5,000 invincible angels fighting for you, why would you even need commands about strategy or perseverance?
You wouldn't. The battle would be over in a second. It would make the human effort totally meaningless.
So these angels, or Malaaikah, they have to be something other than physical warriors.
In this framework, yes. They are seen as agents of God's laws, but applied to the moral and emotional realm. They symbolize an infusion of inner strength, of courage, of solidarity.
So it's basically psychological warfare.
It is, essentially. Their function is to instill qualities like inner calm, sukuna, and steadfastness, thabat. The promise of their aid is a powerful psychological tool. It assures this small, outnumbered group that their spiritual stamina is way, way greater than the enemy's numbers.
Divine aid is about breaking the enemy's will, not just their physical lines.
That's the idea. And what's so critical is that the text itself tells us how to read this.
This is the linchpin.
It is. Right after the story of the angels, the very next verse calls the description an allegory, a bishra, meant to comfort their hearts. And then it says, there is no victory except from God, which subordinates the whole story to the supreme principle of Sunnat Allah. Even divine aid works within the system.
That's a powerful internal check on how you interpret the text. And to really lock this idea in, we can move away from human conflict entirely and look at the natural world.
To the honeybee, the perfect, non-controversial example of consistency.
Surah An-Nahl describes the instruction to the bee. Follow the ways that your Lord has made easy for you.
In this case, there's no ethical dilemma. So what is the teaching? It's the bee's immutable innate programming, the natural law.
Its biological blueprint.
Exactly. The blueprint that guides its complex society, its navigation, the chemistry of turning nectar into honey. The instruction is that permanent blueprint built into the organism.
So God doesn't intervene in the hive every day. He endowed the bee with the perfect instincts and processes from the start.
Yes. And the honey is the predictable, beneficial result of the bee just consistently following the law that was imprinted on it. Divine orchestration is systemic. Creation itself is the proof of the Creator's unwavering law.
Which raises a pretty powerful point. If a non-sentient bee has to follow a fixed system perfectly for its work to be beneficial,
then how much more binding are the moral and ethical laws on us, on rational agents?
that really sets the stage for the final synthesis. If everything from contracts to honey is governed by consistent laws, then the role of a messenger has to be seen systemically too. The sources point to verse 62.2.
And that verse makes the function clear. It's not about giving out arbitrary commands. The messenger's role is to develop human potential paskia and to teach the law with hikmah, or wisdom. He is the channel that translates the fixed divine law into practical, social, and ethical codes for people.
And that leads us to the grand concept of humanity as vicegerents, the Khalifa.
Exactly. And vicegerency is so much more than just existing. It's an entrusted responsibility. We are tasked with enacting justice and moral order. We are the executors of Sunnat Allah on a social level. Our job is to make the ethical laws real in our societies.
But this is where the philosopher Allama Muhammad Iqbal fits in, right? He provides the psychological engine for this very active kind of faith.
He does. Iqbal saw that revelation had to be kept alive through continuous creative interpretation. Ijtihad, you couldn't just rely on interpretations from centuries ago. The law had to be living.
And for that, you needed a new kind of person, fueled by his idea of Qudi, selfhood.
Yes. Qudi is about intellectual courage and moral action. It says that a strong, ethical, self-aware person is the instrument through which divine law is enacted and destiny is reshaped. Faith isn't an excuse for passivity. It's a dynamic force. A strong Qudi means you take responsibility for the world.
So the practical implications are huge. This view turns religious commitment into a real catalyst for social action. Business, public service, even how we consume things. They all become arenas where we actualize our faith.
And it demands a holistic education. You have to link faith with a rigorous study of science and the humanities because both are tools for understanding Sunnat Allah. Every act of justice, from the scribe's contract to the soldier's ethics, becomes a reflection of divine purpose.
We become active participants. We enact the guidance. The divine guidance is actualized when we, as human agents, adhere to the laws, moral and physical, that were laid out for our own success.
And this framework makes restraint and stewardship absolutely central to a faithful life. There's that powerful warning that squanderers are close companions of Satan. We've seen how divine law operates with precision and efficiency everywhere, in battle, in biology, in the market.
So if God's systems demand that kind of non-wasteful precision from a tiny honeybee to produce something healing,
then the provocative question for you, the listener, is this: how much more binding is that imperative for stewardship, environmental, and social onus? On the vicegerents, the Khalifah, what does the strength of your Qudi demand of your own consumption habits starting today?